Welcome into another Horns 24/7 special commitment reaction podcast. I'm Taylor Estes, and I'm joined by Horns 24/7 recruiting analyst Hudson Standish. And Hudson, it has been an unprecedented time, I think we could safely say, for the Longhorns coming off of Arch Manning's commitment. There has been a chain reaction, a ripple effect since Arch Manning did commit to Texas, with several other key targets on the Longhorns board taking the plunge and announcing their commitments themselves. Before we get into it, Hudson, it's been crazy. How are you holding up through all of this?
Yeah, it's been fun at the end of the day, Taylor. A lot of fireworks are popping off. It's a truly kind of unprecedented time for Texas recruiting, and it's kind of everything that we said it would be post Arch Manning commitment. So really exciting, but definitely the sleep hours have kind of dropped. So
Yeah, I think it may be a sleepless summer for our Horns 24/7 recruiting staff, with all of the news that seems to be dropping. Honestly, on by the minute. I mean, on this Sunday, Texas had 5 commitments in one day, and Hudson and I swear we were trying to record podcasts, and it was like, okay, we're ready. Oh, there's another commitment. Okay, we're ready. Okay, there's another commitment. So it was just like, it's crazy times for Texas, but the craziness continues today with the Longhorns landing a huge commitment in 5-star wide receiver Jonte Cook, giving Texas the second 5-star of the 2023 class, with Arch Manning being obviously number one. Hudson, how big of a deal is Jonte Cook's commitment to Texas?
it's a huge deal, Taylor. DeSoto High School is traditionally one of the Dallas area's biggest prospect factories, and to go in there, a national battle for Steve Sarkeesian to target Jonte Cook from the jump as the number one receiver on his board and end up grabbing him along with Arch Manning. I mean, you can't downplay this at all. This is just exactly what Steve Sarkeesian needed, adding another 5-star to the mix with Jonte Cook. In addition to the on-field realities that Cook's going to bring to Austin, he also continues the hype level. This is a kid that's kind of beloved in his class, definitely on the eccentric side, and is going to be a major recruiter for Texas, not only in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but across the entire country. So pairing him with Arch Manning, not only does it create a quarterback to wide receiver combo that we've talked about for almost 18 months, but you get that extra bit of momentum of Jonte Cook publicly recruiting guys like Malik Muhammad, one of his close friends, the cornerback from Dallas South Oak Cliff, and just a ton of others.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the relationships, the friendships that are among them. So one of the big friendships is that between Arch Manning and Jonte Cook. How much of Arch Manning's decision to commit to Texas ultimately led to Jonte Cook also pulling the trigger and committing to the Longhorns?
That's actually kind of a little bit of a funny story, Taylor, because Jonte was scheduled to do an exclusive with Horns 247 about his commitment. He was trying to keep it kind of low key for, I believe, the beginning of July. And we were going to have quotes, a couple of different stories, and he was going to try to make it a little bit of a shock. But once Arch Manning pulled the trigger, we immediately got on the phone with Jonte, and he was like, look, you know where I'm going. Don't even worry about it. Put picks in. Like, this is a done deal. So it's one of those things to where he would have ended up at Texas regardless, but it just sped up the process, and it almost made it to where it was the biggest secret in the world at the state 7-on-7 tournament in College Station, where other reporters from other schools almost knew, like, there's no reason to talk to Jonte Cook. He's ending up with the Texas Longhorns.
Yeah, and that's usually, for those who don't know, when you are at those recruiting events, it's like, it sounds great, to your members that you want to like provide hope for, but when they're not going to the school, it's almost like, why waste my time, and that's the way that you can kind of read the tea leaves, I feel like, in recruiting, if you really think a school is in it or not in it with some of these like high caliber type of prospects. Jonte Cook is one of those. He's the nation's number 35 ranked recruit, 6th wide receiver in the country, number 6 overall prospect in the state of Texas, according to 24/7 Sports. I think when we talk about the addition of this monster edition, I don't want to overlook it. I feel like, everybody looks at the Arch Manning effect and they want to hear all about that. But I mean, this is another 5-star skill player for the Texas offense. And I went back and looked, Hudson, and aside from the 2022 signing class, Texas has not had 2 5-star offensive players sign with the Longhorns since, I almost don't want to say who they were, but since 2009 with Garrett Gilbert and Mason Walters. So that is how long it's been, aside from the 2022 cycle when Texas landed, Calvin Banks and Devin Campbell, 2 5-star offensive linemen. Texas has not been getting the 5-star kind of quarterback skill talent type of players. This is a huge testament to both Steve Sarkeesian and Brennan Marion. How big are their relationships in both with Jonte Cook and with other recruits, really setting the tone for the future of Texas football?
Yeah, Taylor, I think it's a great point. And we talk a lot about the Arch Manning, the kind of Arch Madness recruiting effect. But the stat that you just mentioned about the 2 offensive 5-stars, that's the Steve Sarkeesian effect.
Mhm.
With Kelvin Banks and Devon Campbell last cycle getting those two 5-stars, then following it up with the number 1 player in the nation, somebody who he made his top target from the jump at Texas, and getting Jonte Cook, the guy that he circled as the top wide receiver on his board from the start. Like, that's just Steve Sarkeesian. And then adding Brennan Marion, who we know Jonte Cook has an extremely good relationship with. That just was the icing on the cake, honestly, with this recruitment. We felt extremely confident about Texas for the longest time. And it's one of those things to where I put in a pick at my former company for Jonte last December. And when I was coming over to 247, it was one of those things where it was like, look, we're kind of too close to keep that pick. But we all know that Texas is kind of the de facto leader here. Even though throughout the spring visit process, there were some times where Jonte was kind of trying to lead people to think that other schools were maybe more in it than they actually were.
Yeah, I think one of those schools is probably being Texas A&M when, he took that visit to College Station. A video went viral with him kind of making fun of their trophy room, which also was kind of a thing that he did for Texas too. But, I mean, this is a big deal. And when you talk about Brennan Marion, I feel like one of the biggest things, Hudson, that is maybe not being addressed enough is the fact that Brennan Marion not only, was the I think the last coach to be hired on Steve Sarkeesian's staff after letting go of Andre Coleman. I believe his hire came after Tashard Choice too, but he never really has had too many ties to the state of Texas when it comes to recruiting, and I feel like he has hit the ground running in a way that is not an easy thing to do at a in this type of state with so many other time programs, so many outside out of state programs coming into the state trying to poach the state's best talent because it's such a talent rich state when it comes to blue chip recruits. But Brennan Marion has really done, in my opinion, a solid job of being able to quickly make the connections and ties inside the state of Texas, and it's paying off for the Longhorns.
It's an interesting one, Taylor, with Brennan Marion, because while Pitt necessarily didn't target Texas a ton, they did have a guy in their last class in Shane Wacko from Manor who signed with Pitt, and Brennan Marion was the main reason for. And I think I wrote this at the time that Brennan Marion got hired, but he sneaky did have a lot of relationships with trainers and coaches across the state because he was having to recruit at a kind of lower level at Oklahoma Baptist or at Howard or at, William and Mary, to where he kind of did need to scour the entire country for prospects. So while he didn't have the level of connections that probably your normal Power 5 Texas assistant would, he did have enough, and he did use those effectively, especially considering that he is close friends with Jonte Cook's select 7-on-7 team, Texas Flex, and the people who run that organization. So it's one of those ones where he didn't have all of the connections right away, but with how personable he is and how good of a recruiter, quite frankly, he is, it didn't take long for him to get up to speed and use those prior connections. Taylor, I think that it just makes a little bit of a sense when somebody's been on your side and in your corner, even when you're at lower schools like an Oklahoma Baptist, that's, I believe, an NAIA program, it's a little bit easier to trust those people once you kind of get the Texas level clout and everybody is trying to send you kids all the time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Steve Sarkeesian has talked about both Brennan Marion and Tashard Choice bringing a different young type of energy to not just the coaching staff and to the team, but also on the recruiting trail. And they, I think they both have done a really good job. Let's take a look at what's next for Texas coming out of Jonte Cook's commitment. Obviously, a huge deal again, as we mentioned. Texas usually doesn't get these type of, 5-star offensive skill players, at least not since I started covering the Longhorns, honestly. And so, what type of effect do you think could happen from Jonte Cook and, the combination of him and Arch Manning probably leading to potentially other commitments landing in the Longhorns' favor?
I'm not sure there's going to be as much of a pure domino effect, but I think that it's going to keep the vibes in a really good spot, for lack of a better term. And Texas still looks great for their top target at running back, Cedric Baxter out of Orlando, Florida, who's a fringe 5-star in the 2023 class. And kind of another thing, Taylor, with the offensive line class now set following this weekend, maybe they'll kind of hunt for one more elite guy, but you have 4 really solid commits on the offensive line. Your wide receiver class is kind of coming into form with Jonte Cook's announcement. Maybe they can make up some ground for Jalen Hale, the I believe border high 4-star out of Longview, Texas. But for the most part, I just think that it's going to continue the recruits' perception that Texas is one of the top classes in the 2023 cycle. And also, Taylor, one more thing. I think before we get off this podcast, I just kind of need to talk about Jonte Cook's game and kind of what he does well. What I think is the most insane stat, maybe of any recruit in the state. Last year, Jonte Cook only had 38 catches for DeSoto High School, which isn't a ton considering that DeSoto, I believe, played 14 games. But of those 38 catches, he ended up taking half of them, 19, to the house for touchdowns. That's one of the wildest stats when 1 out of every 2 catches is going to the house. And that's not just deep balls. He's taking screens to the house as well. What I love about Jonte Cook's game is that he's an extremely fluid route runner. At the top of his stem, he can create separation going in any direction. And he's just so nuanced with how he kind of sets up defensive backs for breaks. He's great on double moves. He's really good in the quick game. He's a sneaky, elusive runner in the open field. His athletic profile probably is going to limit him from being a true 5-star for 247. But he has a high enough floor as a receiver that you can see every single recruiting site has him as a high 4-star, which leads to him being a composite 5.
Yeah, I mean, that's an insane stat. And it's not like he's playing against some scrub competition. I mean, he's playing against the best of the best in Texas high school football.
Texas high school football, 6A, is the best competition in America. That's not a bias. National analysts will say that. And Jonte Cook plays in the toughest district with schools like Duncanville, Cedar Hill, a ton, Waxahachie. It's a legit competition, and he's kind of dominating them. In addition to the fact that once he got into the playoffs, he was playing schools like Killeen Harker Heights, Rockwall, Spring Westfield, just a loaded slate of competition. And in addition to his high school ball, he plays for one of the best 7-on-7 programs and will also go to the big club tournaments like OT7 and stand out there as well. So this is a battle-tested player that is kind of clear to see why Steve Sarkeesian had him at number 1 on his board for so long. Taylor, just could not be you just can't say enough about how exciting it is that Texas got their guy at wide receiver 1.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm curious for this. I'm kind of throwing you a curveball here. If you look at Jonte Cook, who would be a good comparison from a skill set wide receiver?
That's a really good question. I think that I'd probably say a Keenan Allen type, somebody who is really good with their route running and their hands are extremely reliable. I think that that's probably who I'd go with that one.
Okay, that's not a bad comparison there
Not at
at
all.
all. Not at all there. Hudson, anything else that you want to add about, this magnitude of a commitment and what this means for Texas?
It's major, and I don't think that the Longhorns are done before the time that the dead period's over. It's a little bit tough with timelines because each kid kind of has their own process. Everybody wants to get a video done. Some have dates that are special to them and are going to wait a little bit longer, even though it seems like they're pretty firmly silent to Texas. But I mean, I don't think that this is over yet.
Yeah. Another reason why you want to stay locked in at Horns 24/7. Make sure you subscribe for an annual membership. New members get 30% off their first year. Because I think it's very safe to say that this is going to be a summer to remember for Texas recruiting. And, obviously we can't, overlook the team stuff going on too. A big year coming up for Steve Sarkeesian. There's going to be a plenty of information that you're going to want to keep up on if you're a Texas fan over at Horns 24/7. So make sure that you subscribe for that annual membership and make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are trying to build that up a little bit. Maybe we'll come up with some type of competition or something if we hit a certain benchmark. Hudson and I will have to talk about that. Hudson's the brains between the type of promo to get people to engage on our YouTube channel. So Hudson, always great stuff. You guys are running like chickens with your heads cut off. Honestly, I mean, it's been wild for the Longhorns. So thanks for all that you do. And thank you to everyone for listening. For Hudson Standish, I'm Taylor Estes. We'll talk to y'all later.